Welcome to Discerning the Forums. I'm Nick.
I'm Anthony. Hey man, it's been a minute.
Hey, it has. I am so excited to be doing this podcast tonight, and we probably had about 30 minutes of catching up because,
Yeah,
you know, but
lots going
yeah,
on. Lots going
I've
on with
been
it.
in lot going on. Just I've been undergoing an adoption, and I've been traveling abroad. Been in Kyiv, Ukraine, and a beautiful place. And so,
Hard to do podcasts when you're in that kind of
yeah,
space.
it's a
So
little bit weird. Yeah. I
yeah,
think we pulled together one. My audio
we
quality
did the
was really
Dune.
low,
Yeah,
but
the Dune. Yeah, it was the Dune.
Dune,
Yeah, that's
yes,
right. That was the last one we did.
yes,
So yeah,
yes.
it still was good. It
Love it.
was. I enjoyed the conversation, but
Me too.
um, yeah.
Me too. Tonight we're going to talk about deconstruction. And so, it's funny, one time I actually had someone in my church talk about this, and they came up to me and they said, I'm really struggling. I've been really deconstructing my faith lately. And,
Hmm.
because I'm kind of a philosophy nerd, the first thing I thought of was Jacques Derrida. And I thought, what?
Yeah,
It's
Derrida's the
like,
first. Yeah,
what? You're getting into like
huh? Post
post-structuralism
structuralism,
and
right? Like what?
hermeneutics
That's
and
not. Yeah, that's not what he's talking about. No,
semiotics.
that's
And
not what he's talking about.
what were you into? Yeah.
Although I think they're
So,
related. I think those are related. I
yeah.
don't think they're
Are
not,
yeah.
but, they are, but, like, not that's
Somebody,
probably not exactly what he was
if
talking about, I'm sure.
right. Would you argue I suppose this is a little bit of a leading question, but would you argue that if someone is using it in the same way, that Derrida misread?
Ooh, interesting. I don't know if I'm prepared to answer that question, actually. Maybe. Oh,
Um,
I'm such a I read so much James K.
okay.
Smith, and I'm kind of like
Yeah, yeah,
I'm still sus of a lot of that stuff, like deconstructionism and, but I think,
yeah.
y s
Yep.
Jamie Smith, he does a great job of repurposing a lot of the language of sort of
Yep.
continental, Derrida. I think it might I'll say this, I think it actually might be a misread. I'll put it out there. I think it might be a misread of Derrida if they're going in that direction,
Yeah.
but
I agree with
I
you.
also could be
I
wrong.
think yeah. Well, okay, so what is deconstruction in the popular sense? Well, maybe you've heard of this, but there are all sorts of musicians, right now. I'm
Seems
trying
like
to think of all the
a lot of
different people.
it's a lot
Yeah.
of musicians. Well, the
Yeah, why is
Gungars,
it
I know
musicians? Yeah. Yeah, yeah.
well, I actually have some thoughts about
Worship
that because
leaders?
yeah, like
Yeah.
worship leaders and like also guys in bands, the kind of stuff that we
Yep.
used to listen to. I feel
Yep.
like, and just for some context, I think a lot of bands,
Mhm.
and if you're familiar with like Tooth and Nail, Solid State Records, bands like Under Oath, Ad Cities Burn, Me Without You, a lot of these bands, and even the more metal like Destroy the
David
Runner,
Bazan. Yeah. Mhm.
yeah, like a lot of these bands, I think, sort of played like priestly pastor roles to kids, at least from what I
Yeah.
remember,
Yeah, yeah.
in ways that I think they were not prepared for, and I
Right.
see a lot of the fallout of some of the, especially like Under Oath. I know they've really gone a lot of. I would
Yeah.
say they've deconstructed. I don't know if they would use that word, but I think
Mhm.
they have at some level because
Mhm.
it seems like they're almost like responding to what they used to be. Because what they used to be, I think they might consider, I don't know if they inauthentic, but like that they were,
Mhm.
I don't know, playing the
So
role of
what
the
is it?
Christian band, and yeah.
Yeah, what is it? Is it like deconversion? Or but then sometimes they're kind of vague about it. They're like, "No, but I still love God and I read theology books," or something. It's
I
like,
think
"Oh,
it's like a flattening of Christianity. It's like a flattening of the horizon where you want to open up more doors to bring more stuff in because you think Christianity, especially now for those who don't, I mean, I'm sure if you're listening to this podcast, I'm sure you've come across the notion of people deconstructing faith. And what that means essentially is that they are taking elements of their faith that they had been taught all their life, and they discovered like maybe some nuance, or they maybe that it was wrong at some level. So
mhm,
then they start to have serious doubt about the sort of doctrine they believe, sort of the worldview that they
mhm,
have, which is very, most of the time it tends to come from very fundamentalist conservative backgrounds that are very rationalist, very intense about whether it's like creation or biblical
Yeah.
doctrine. They're very narrow, so that, but
Mhm.
they're very hyperly intense about defending it. But then once nuance starts to come into the purview for, I think for some people, it causes them a lot of like existential, like, oh no, like my faith seems to be wrong. It doesn't seem quite to match up to this. So then they start to and they go back and they go through. And I've never done this, so I don't have experience with
Mhm.
like having a deconstruction moment, um,
Mhm.
which we'll talk about later. But so basically, it's just
Yeah.
about
Mhm.
the the picking apart of what you used to believe, and then you try to find a
Mhm.
way forward by critically
Mhm.
having a critical stance to your past beliefs. And that's through
Yeah.
whatever mean. It's through a lot of different means, but that's the
Mhm.
general sense of what deconstruction is
Yeah.
from my vantage
Yeah,
point.
I mean, this'll be interesting. I'm interested, we've talked a little bit about this before, kind of our histories, but and I
Yeah.
know that you came from an unbelieving background and then found faith, so it was almost like you were
Mhm.
maybe, and this is kind of the way I always think of it because I don't think of this stuff in a continuum. It has to do
Mm-mm.
with deeper this is it has to do with deeper presuppositions and
Mm.
religious commitment. So, someone could be, let's say, an atheist and deconstruct that, or a
Mhm.
Mormon and deconstruct that, or something.
Yeah.
So basically, it's as you're saying, you're kind of. But what it seems to me is almost kind of a coming of age kind of thing. Like when you grow
Mm.
up and you always were told that you have a guardian angel, or when
Mhm.
um or something like that, and then like.
Yeah.
Which I believe in
Or
guardian
just
angels
some, like,
anyway,
very sort
but
of some infantile
yeah, yeah,
belief that your parents had, like, perpetuated in your life,
yeah.
and
Not
then
to
you
not
come
to
to
be
know
goofy,
for
but it's Christmas season, it's like the Santa Claus
mm.
narrative that you
Well,
discover wasn't real or something. But
yeah.
but it might not
Yeah.
necessarily be that something isn't necessarily real, but you discover, "Oh, there was
Right.
a real Santa
Saint
Claus,"
Nick.
but,
Right. Saint Nick
Saint
was real,
Nick,
he's sort of, but
yeah.
even
I still think he's
even
praying for us in heaven.
something like, well, I even, having these conversations about, uh, the belief in Santa Claus, I think is an interesting one, especially, like, the myth around that, and, like, the
Yeah.
enchantedness
Yeah, yeah.
of Santa Claus himself is, like, it's almost, to me, it's kind of important to have a, not to perpetuate, like, a lie necessarily, but the reality of,
Mhm,
like, the world is deeply mysterious, and there are these figures
mhm,
that culturals that are manifested in culture for good reasons, for a lot of good reasons, and most of it
mhm.
is, I mean, Santa Claus in particular is rooted in Saint Nicholas at some level, right? Like,
Yeah.
but the sort of myth that culture carries, there's an interesting conversation there,
Mhm.
that we're not gonna have right now, but
Yeah.
something like what you're
Yeah,
saying,
that's
right?
cool.
Like, you have these beliefs, and then
Mhm,
you have a coming of age, like, "Oh, this is not actually how the world is," or
mhm. It's
something.
like learning
Something
about
like
sex,
that. Yeah,
when you're a kid, the babies just come out of mama somehow,
somewhere. Yeah,
but
somehow.
somehow it just
Yeah,
happens.
somehow it happens.
And then you get older and you learn about it. So,
Mhm.
I think that
Something like that.
yeah. So one of the first artists that you're talking about, artists and
Mhm.
influencing the worship scene, I think that's really interesting. I know an artist that really has influenced me a lot, and one who I loved growing up, and I remember, um, when he deconstructed, but David Bazan from the band Pedro the Lion, and
Yeah,
so, and I think you're familiar with him,
a
but
little
he
bit,
came
yeah.
out
I
with.
wasn't a huge fan with Pedro
Mhm.
Lion, but, like, I know who he is, and I have some friends that
Yeah,
that really loved him. So,
yeah,
yeah, I'm
and I
aware.
felt like, yeah, I felt like there was a domino effect, like, after he came out with Curse Your Branches, and it's like,
Mhm.
"Okay, fine, I'm an atheist," and, then there was, like, this domino effect with these other artists who might
Yeah.
have. I feel like they were listening to him too, and and, like,
Mhm.
deciding, "Oh, yeah, this is me," identified with it, but I
Yeah.
I do remember the Under Oath one, that was
Mm,
kind of a big deal, for people
yeah,
that were into the Christian hardcore scene
for
and metal
sure.
scene.
Oh, yeah. They were
Yeah,
like the sort of cream of the crop
yeah,
for that time.
yeah,
Them and As I Lay Dying at some
mhm,
level too, I think were also
yeah.
and then he, like, I think hired a hitman to kill his
Who
wife. He
murdered
was
his
the lead singer is,
yeah,
like,
yeah,
super,
tried
like,
to.
just, like, wild. He's, like, cheating on her constantly, like, doesn't like, "Oh, man, like, your music is, like the lyrics are so good," and, like, I was, like, really emotionally connected to which I still do, but it's like,
Yeah, I
man, the
saw him
whole time,
live.
it's
Yeah,
amazing. Yeah, I did too, they're
yeah, they were
fantastic. They
amazing
were
live.
incredible.
Yeah, yeah,
Oh, the drummer is insane,
yeah. Oh, I
but yeah,
know.
this sort of
Yeah,
the domino effect. I think I might
yep.
agree with you that, like, from what I know, I mean, sort of the one of the major ones that I heard first with the Gungors, which I was not ever
Yeah,
really
yeah.
into them, but I knew,
Mhm,
like, just being in sort of non-denominational churches for a long time, you just run across this stuff, especially
yeah.
their music, and I remember when it first
Mhm,
started happening, and I was like, "Oh, okay, like, that's interesting." Um, and I
mhm,
didn't really have any framework for it, but it was just, like, seemed like very new agey and like,
mhm,
we're all part of the God thing. And the way he talks on Twitter now, I'm like,
mhm.
"Dude, you're not a Christian, and this is insane," but
Why do
not to,
they
like
always lap
not to
into
judge people.
lapse in yeah, I mean, I don't yeah, I don't wanna be judgmental. I think people are just,
No,
like, trying to articulate
people
what
are
they're going through, but
processing, right? Like, this is
yeah,
the
they really are
we're not it's
processing.
I
Yeah, yeah.
as hard as I wanna be on the deconstruction movement, and I do get really
Mhm.
annoyed and, like, "Ah, can you just get over it already? Like, come on, like, there's there's the rich tradition, like, it's okay, like,
Right.
the tradition is born the weight of nuance, and
Mhm.
you don't have to hold to, like, crazy extreme beliefs, and, but
Yeah.
I recognize that it's actually probably more of a pastoral issue than an intellectual issue. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, there's at a
Right, right.
more fundamental level that it's more,
Mhm.
you stop praying and things kinda go that way. Or you,
Mhm.
like, whether it's, like, stop going to church
Mhm.
or, like I mean, there's a
Mhm.
myriad of reasons why people deconstruct, and I respect
Yeah.
them. I respect
Mhm.
their space to do that, and I'm not gonna
Mhm.
hate on anybody unnecessarily, but I would like
Yeah.
to maybe guide them to more deeper, richer
Mhm.
waters that are already, like, fundamentally
Mhm.
Orthodox Christianity, right? Like,
Yeah.
Nicene,
Right.
Trinitarian,
Right.
that is way better than whatever new stuff they're gonna get now. Like, it's way better.
Right.
That's my only
Yeah.
that would be my only thing,
Yeah. Yeah,
you
exactly.
know?
And I always discover people that are going through this, and because okay, I should mention this. We in my I think I went through something like that, and
Mm,
back then it wasn't called deconstructing. It was just um, trying to figure out what you believed when you got older and having a lot
mhm.
of doubts and stuff. And so for
Yeah.
me, yeah, I remember just thinking like, okay, well, it's important that I kind of grow up and own my beliefs. And so I
Mhm.
kind of want to just sit down and look at everything I believe and just ask, is this can this be supported? Is this important for
Mm.
my life? Is it real? Those kinds of things. And Beth and I had just gotten married. I think for me it was kind of this like someday I'll be a dad kind of a thing, and I'm
Yeah.
gonna have to teach my
Sure.
kids something. And
Mhm.
yeah, so I kind of went on a quest. And so, but yeah, the foundation for me was I grew up with a Christian faith that in an evangelical culture, and there were some things that I had to kind of get over. My favorite is the Rapture Theory,
Yeah.
the end
Yeah,
times
we talked I think we
nightmare
talked
that
about that. I think you mentioned that in
we
in our
did,
on our
thinking that
apocalypse
I
episodes,
yeah, thinking that
processing it.
your parent yeah. Yeah, so, at a certain point, you just kinda sit back and you're like, "Okay, is this piece of theology or thing that I believe, is that real? Why do I believe it? Is it because, everyone else in my culture is believing it, it's kinda reinforcing it for me?"
Mm.
Or,
Mhm.
um, and for, a lot of things is so I'll put a link to in our notes to this episode, by Justin Brierly Justin Brierly's unbelievable radio program. Um, it's actually an amazing, uh, podcast or radio program where oftentimes they'll have two people from two different sides, Christian and atheist talking, or Christians from different, positions of something talking. And
Mm.
um, they recently did one on November 27th. They released an episode called "Why Are Christian Musicians Deconstructing?" and it's Audrey Assad. What'd she write? Did she write the "Who You Say I
I
Am"
don't I don't know who
song?
she is. I don't know who that is.
She's a
Maybe I'm just, like,
famous
out of the loop.
worship.
Okay.
Yeah. So
Yeah, that makes
somebody
sense.
drop it in the comments. Yeah. Yeah.
Tell us who Audrey Assad is. I mean,
Yeah.
who is the
Post a
the the guy
YouTube link or
who's
something.
the Chris Foley? What was that guy?
Yeah.
What band was he
Remember
in?
Chris Foley? He
What
was
band
in
was
the band Luxury. Luxury.
Luxury, that's what you
They
said. Yeah, you're telling me
they
that,
were
yeah.
yeah, they were on Tooth and Nail for a minute, and their stuff was really good. It was really energetic indie,
Mhm.
and, they were kind of ahead of their time.
Mhm.
Um, they I guess the band members had some car accident and had kind of a mystical experience, and eventually all found themselves in, the Orthodox or be I think 3 of the members became Orthodox priests, 3 out of
I
5 or
mean,
something. Yeah.
what a trajectory.
I know.
That is
So that's
wild.
a fun one to listen to, someone who kinda deconstructed
Yeah.
their faith, and another one who
Who went the literal
maybe
almost
kinda
opposite of deconstruction,
yeah,
you know?
exactly. What
Opposite of
yeah,
it, in a way.
yeah. Well, listening to that episode, something stood out to me. Audrey Assad talks about how she went into a bookstore and found a book by Josephus,
Mm,
who's an ancient
the
Jewish
the Jewish
historian,
historian.
yeah,
Mhm,
contemporary of Jesus, and
mhm.
documents or Second Temple Judaism at that time, and then
Yeah.
the
He has something
fall of
about Christ, right?
Jerusalem.
He has something about
Yeah, he mentioned something. Apologists usually refer to him to establish
yeah,
the
he's like a
historicity of
major
Jesus
one of the more
outside of
major historians of the time
yeah,
that reference Christ
mhm,
who isn't a Christian
mhm,
source,
yeah.
which for some reason that makes it more credible. I'm not I mean, whatever, but that's another
Yeah, Luke
conversation.
was a doctor, or Matthew is probably had parchment
Right.
paper and was directly writing down things Jesus did. I don't
Uh,
as a
yeah, dude,
tax
I don't know,
collector,
but
yeah.
whatever.
But, yeah, I the reasons that we have to establish that outside of the tradition, but, yeah, so in her conversation, she says that she walks into a bookstore and finds this book, reads it, and all of a sudden realizes there's someone with another perspective in the first century. I'm thinking, Josephus? I mean, and
That's what
I mean, I
took it
felt
off?
bad for her. Yeah, and so
That's what
that's
took
kind
it
of
off?
a
The
yeah, that
deconstruction? Is
seeded
that?
the doubts in her. Yeah,
Wow.
and I thought
That
that was
that
interesting. Yeah,
huh.
I thought that was interesting, as I thought, I felt bad for her because I thought, "You must be." She said she grew up Plymouth Brethren. I don't know enough about that
Sounds
church or
very
context
specific.
maybe of the
Sounds
church she was
very,
in.
very specific, yeah.
Yeah,
Huh.
and she said,
Interesting.
she at least felt the impression. I doubt if you talk to a pastor in the from her church that he would say, "Well, we never told her not to read Josephus." But I think her impression was we don't read any books outside of the Bible or something about the New Testament about some I'm not sure what her
Yeah.
impression
I
was, but
mean, that's
she felt like she
possible.
couldn't. I mean,
Yeah.
it's from her perspective, she just felt like she
Yeah.
couldn't read any of the
That's how she
books, and
felt.
so she
Sure.
discovered this.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now I thought that interesting, kinda odd because it mapped on the same thing I've heard David Bazan say, because I'm a David
Mhm.
Bazan fan.
Mhm.
I actually love Cursory Branches. It's one of my favorites, and even as a Christian, I think it's deeply profound. Um,
Yeah.
and I think that he touches on important themes in that work. But anyway, David Bazan mentioned something like that too. Like he discovered some kind of um, Oxford handbook on the historicity of Jesus or some kind of deal, and
Mm.
realized or the New Testament, or realized that it was in doubt or something, or had some
Yeah.
controversy.
Those
So I thought,
historical liberals are or 19th century liberals are a bummer. I
Yeah.
really don't like those
Yeah,
guys,
if you
but
run into them, yeah.
just ignore it. Like, maybe not ignore it, but,
Like,
like, you
with
really
the
have to take
times
that
or
stuff with a yeah, I don't know, you have to take this with a grain of salt.
yeah,
I mean, the historicity of
yeah,
Jesus is a very specific sort of ideological move
discipline. Yeah.
about how we understand how his history works and how, like, the Bible
Mhm,
functions, and the notion that myth is like some is just a cultural artifact where Jesus, the real historical Jesus, isn't in the New Testament. You only have the mythological one. So they take apart. It's like this very idea. Sorry, I did like a whole paper on this. So like I
yeah.
really dug a little bit deep, but like just for some people who
Tracking.
don't know,
Mhm,
that what they do is that they're sort of poisoned by German idealism, which is sort of like rooted in
mhm,
Kant and Hegel,
mhm,
and basically the empirical sphere and the sort of moral, or the realm of ideas are different than the realm of the physical, and the realm of ideas is the most important thing. So for the 19th century liberals, Christianity is just a moral, it's just a moral religion. It has nothing to do with real, like you read the Bible, you read Jesus, you're not reading the real historical Jesus. You're only reading the mythical Jesus, and you have to follow
mhm.
his moral sort of guidance, and like he's a great teacher that way. But then you
Yeah.
literally undercut everything. The truth is not there. And Nietzsche, this is how Nietzsche sort of jumps the ship from being sort of like a Lutheran to like, I don't know if atheist is
Mhm,
the right word, but like sort of he's like it's not possible because of guys like Schelling and whatever. So that's a whole thing. So
mhm.
don't just ignore those guys. There's you need you need
Yeah.
better context than just
Well, there's more
19th century
conversation that's gone
historical.
on since then. Yeah, and
Sure. Yeah,
and
before
all of
and
those
yeah,
right, and all of the foundations, those authors have been, I mean, even as we move into postmodernism, all those essential things
yeah,
have fallen away. So they're I mean,
totally.
for instance, little tiny thing when you're talking about history of Jesus, that's why a lot of us are NT Wright fans because,
Yeah,
he does such a really good,
he's helpful.
in Jesus and the Victory of God, and then, yeah,
Mhm.
New Testament People of God is well, uh, there's just a contemporary discussion that has gone beyond all that stuff that is
Yeah,
it's kinda funny, but they just start with the premise that, "Oh, wait, Jesus was a Jew, not like a Greek cynic
right.
philosopher," or
Yeah,
so,
like, there
like, as if
there
we understand him in his Jewish context, like, all sorts of
yeah.
things open up, and we
Well,
understand
if you
what he
want,
was
I
doing,
mean,
why he was
once you
doing
start to
this.
get into, like, right, like, literary studies of the scriptures,
Yeah,
right, you understand the literary
exactly,
sort of context of the gospels, and you find out that they're not, like, historical by way of, like, the way that we think of historical,
right.
and, once you kind of understand what's going on in a way, like, a lot of those problems to me just kinda go away pretty quickly. Not that there aren't problems still, but, like,
Sure.
uh, part of it for me is, like, I think the way it's how modern we wanna be with our categories when we look into the Bible. Especially the deconstruction movement is like a hyper modernist project, I think. It's not,
Yeah, I find
I
it
know
interesting
people,
that their
yeah,
god yeah, the god they imagine then
yeah,
afterward is kind of like an old 19th century
yeah,
Unitarian god,
very
it's
much.
like a something that is out of the, um, I know it's
Yeah,
obscure
it's
obscure
yeah, it's
Enlightenment
very,
history. Yeah,
it's, like, very nebulous. Yeah, it's very nebulous. It's like the
yeah,
all sort of paths lead that way, and, but it's interesting going back to Derrida a little bit, I think
mhm,
when to understand Derrida, and I think that guys like James K. Smith and John Milbank, sort of radical orthodoxy, what they get right, especially in their critique of some of the postmodern well, they would say actually quote unquote postmodern, because Derrida actually is pretty modern. Like he's actually incredibly modern in his
right,
categories,
and he
right? So he's
resisted
not,
that term. Yeah,
yes. So like
yeah,
he's not postmodern. And uh all these guys who are, whether they're following Derrida, Foucault, even like Marx in a sense is like sort of, he's just in these enlightenment categories, right? Of being, of
mhm,
existence, how we understand knowledge, what it means to know. Um, so they're not like postmodern in the way of like we've gone past. sort of objectivity, and everything is just
Mhm.
located in its cultural context. That would be
Yeah.
a rough shot of what some people think postmodernity is, but it's obviously a much more complicated situation. So, um,
Mhm.
that I firmly put this deconstruction movement in a modernist space about,
Mhm.
whether it's like epistemological categories or like
Mhm.
anything that they're sort of, if you just listen to the kind of the discussions that they're having, they're really encountering modern uh, questions framed in modern categories that don't take into account. I mean, I think once they meet difference, I mean, it seems like what happens is that they've been raised in such a way, and they've been so like sort of shallowly and narrowly focused in their
Yeah.
perspective that
Yeah, if you can't
any
pick up
sense
a
of nuance.
Josephus book, yeah.
I mean, that is so wild to me that Josephus sent her off in the deconstruction. Maybe
Yeah,
there's something more in there that I'm not like aware of, um,
yeah.
but it seems like the when
You
that sort of when the doubts come in, like
Mhm.
they start they everything loses its grounding because the grounding is
Mhm.
so feeble anyways, from what I understand of a lot of these people's upbringings. Like,
Mhm.
I'm fine with them, like, putting that away. Like, you gotta kind of abandon some of this, like, really weak sauce, shallow
Right.
Christianity that doesn't
Mhm.
hold up to anything, really, unless you're, like, living in a bubble, and, go to the but what they do is they don't
Right.
turn back to the tradition because the tradition is sus because it's old, right? Like, it's this old
Mhm.
thing, and, like, these old guys who are on councils decided, like, that
Mhm.
God was true, whatever it is. So, they'll go and what
Mhm.
happens is they won't go back with, like, a positive view of tradition. They'll have a wholly critical and negative view for the most
Mhm.
part. Some deconstruct people who talk about deconstruction are they're at least trying to recapture something that's traditional, but most of the
Mhm.
time I've seen it's just they're, like, so focused on Christianity's not exclusive, or like
Yeah.
Jesus wasn't exclusive, or something along
Mhm.
those lines where
Mhm.
it just doesn't seem to me to be the best posture. But again, I'm not
Yeah.
processing what they're processing. I had my own things that happened to me, and I had to process them in
Mhm.
a specific way. But I obviously ended up in where I am now, which
Mhm.
is I didn't go to I didn't but I mean deconstruct wasn't really a word for me back then. Like I had I could
Mhm.
tell just two moments of like um, times where I had to deal with doubt, right? So the
Mhm.
first time was when I converted to Christianity when I was around 18 years old. I had met some friends of mine who are still some of my best friends today at a community
Mhm.
college here in Milwaukee, and
Mhm.
I just I got to know them. We were in the music section. We were in like the music department where we wanted to pursue music, um,
Mhm.
and I just became a Christian through their, like, joy and their love and their passion for music and, like, a lot of the Christian music. I was into, like, Thrice, and I was just getting into Under Oath, so it was, like,
Mhm.
really nice. So then, for a little while after that, I was like, "Do I actually believe, or am I just believing because all my friends believe?"
Mm.
Right? So this sort
Yeah.
of, I think it's, like, a common thing that people go
Yeah, you gotta
through.
mature there's levels. Is it
Right.
because evangelicalism so emphasizes the conversion moment that when
Mhm.
someone has seeds of doubt, they
Yeah.
feel like they gotta make a decision for something?
Yes.
I gotta
That's definitely a
it's
part of
either
it for
this or
sure.
that. I'm either in or out.
Right.
I either got this or that.
Or if I'm having these
When
doubts, was I ever in, right? Like, that
Yeah.
sort of idea,
Mhm.
the conversion, like, time, I remember I remember that just being, like, what it was, like, "Oh, when was the day?" And I have, like I
Mhm.
remembered it for a while, but now I don't really I just recall where I was when I, like, sort of it wasn't, like, a really ecstatic moment, it was more just like, "Oh, you are the truth, like, I need you." That was sort of, it was
Yeah.
personal, and I just did it to myself. I didn't tell anybody that weekend because it was like, I gotta kinda process this a little bit, because I never thought I'd become a
Mhm.
Christian. And then the second time was when I was first starting getting into, like, philosophy and apologetics. I was coming across some arguments that I was like, "Boy, is God I don't even know if God's real, like, I don't even know." And I was dealing in, more analytical circles, and, so that really freaked me out for a minute. But then I started reading Alvin Plantinga, which I mentioned before on the podcast, and then Kierkegaard. And like from there on, it was like those were like two good brothers in the journey, right? Of like the existential
Yeah.
crisis. Like those were for me very, very good brothers in the journey.
Well,
Which
that's
set
what
me on the
I
direction I'm at
find.
now.
Mhm. And maybe it's, yeah, I'm not trying to poke fun at musicians. I am a musician myself, but I'm just wondering,
That's what I've been my whole life. I was in bands
we're
forever. That's what I
musicians,
did.
we understand this.
Yeah,
But
completely.
I why is it that someone, I mean, okay, so we know there's, I guess if I wanna research a topic, maybe this is, I think this is maybe just going away in our culture in general. Maybe we just don't know how to,
Mhm.
the general public doesn't know how to research or something, but, because,
Yeah.
but there's a sense of where if I wanna find out about a topic, I kinda go to, I compare different views, but then I also, um, find good, struggling for words. I think
Horses or
it's easier to
something?
go, yeah,
Something like
it's easier
that?
to go back to that, the historical Jesus thing, like, okay, why be
Yeah.
stuck in, like, the early 1900s and,
Mhm.
stuff like that? Why not pick up, and there are some modern scholars on that are skeptical, then there's some like NT Wright,
Mhm.
and these are big deals. You mentioned,
Mhm.
Alvin Plantinga is one of the
Mhm.
top
Big time.
analytic
Yeah.
philosophers in
Christian
America,
philosophers.
it's just,
Yeah, big time.
so, I mean, to me, it's a sign that maybe you don't want to be Christian, maybe you're ready to kind of
Mm.
search something else.
Yeah,
I
I was
think,
gonna say, I actually
yeah,
didn't wanna stop believing. Emotionally,
yeah,
I didn't wanna stop believing. So, like, I
yeah,
mean, you could say that maybe is like I have a bias there, but there's all like you said, there's the bias
we do,
towards not wanting to believe, right? Like,
yeah,
there is that. So, I
yeah.
didn't wanna
I
not
think it's
believe. I was like,
emotional,
yeah,
spiritual. Yeah, I think
it is
what
completely.
happens
Yeah,
is,
it's completely.
if you wanna have a perspective on science and stuff,
Mhm.
you, you have presuppositions and you look for stuff that
Yeah,
confirms your own presuppositions. I'm not saying that's always
totally.
healthy. We need to challenge ourselves. You need to look out, but there is
Yeah,
that kind of deep down desire of want, and you shouldn't just want something for fear. You're like, "Oh, I can't read Josephus. That might like bust my faith or
yeah.
something."
That was what
And I think
I
there's,
felt that for a while.
yeah,
Yeah, the fear of,
yeah,
like, not wanting to read stuff, I felt that for a while. Yeah.
yeah. I have to. It where you're like, if I read this one thing, like I'm
What
gonna
if
lose
yeah.
it. I'm gonna lose
What if
what I
I'm over?
have, what
What
I
if it's
love.
over for me? Yeah,
Yeah,
because I might not have the good
yeah.
response.
Yeah, I
Um,
think maybe it's Christian support. It's the individualism. It's the,
mhm.
I'm gonna figure this all out by myself because no one else
Yeah,
can. I remember when I was
yeah,
struggling through, kind of going through the doubt phase, and I want to figure out all the pieces. But I was in conversation with people I was close to in my church and in
mm.
the faith. I think and to be fair, I think so are some of these musicians. I think
Yeah, no, I
Assad
there's n
was
yeah,
too. Yeah.
yeah,
So,
I think so too.
yeah, so I mean, not everybody, and then people have bad experiences too, where their pastor just shuts them down or something. So I know it's scary,
Yeah, that I understand why
but
they wanna not
yeah.
I
So you
get
kinda
that.
need to kind of, yeah, you have to see there's different traditions within Christianity. You just kinda, um you can reach out to some of these deeper ones that have
Mhm.
much more, girth to them, so there's
Yeah,
there's a, uh philosopher Alistair McIntyre, and I brought him up before, but he
mhm,
basically says,
yeah,
"Look, if something's been lasting, for a long
mhm,
time,
yeah,
like, he she's talking about virtue ethics, it's
mhm.
something to
Yeah,
it
it's Aristotelian,
it's a better
rooted
default.
long
It's a better
term, yeah.
default than your new fly by night reconstruction, because it's
Yeah. No,
it's
that's very
coming
true.
from a place that's not reinventing the wheel. It's playing.
Yeah,
It's having a conversation, a dialogue with history. I think there's a lack of wanting, I think might be a cultural issue, the kind of jamming or cancel
mhm,
culture thing that we have, just like shutting people
mhm,
off or defriending or shutting down a conversation. There's a lot of people conversation stopping, and,
mhm,
but I mean, if you love truth and you really want to grow in your spirituality and your faith, you
mhm.
have a dialogue with that tradition, and
Totally.
you may
Yeah.
have doubts and be like, "Why? I don't know if I believe that, you gotta show me this or
Yeah.
whatever, or
Well,
I'm not sure what I
yeah,
think about eschatology. Well, okay,
sure.
like, you don't have to bust your faith over it, like, just
No.
here's the different views of eschatology. Here's what the
Right.
tradition has been debating and
Mhm.
dialoguing with, or
Well,
views of
even
hell. People doing that
yeah, that
too,
was
or
I
they'll
know that's a
leave the
big one
faith.
for I know that's a big one in the
Yeah,
deconstruction, that the
because 'cause
topic
they're
of
like,
hell
"I
is
was
pretty
always
big right
scared
now.
I was going to hell." And it's
Yeah.
like, well, okay, well, that was a really thin interpretation from a
Yeah.
certain
No
perspective in
nowhere in
fundamentalism. Yeah.
Yeah, nowhere in the New Testament is there ever I mean, Jesus talks about judgment and pre and but we
Mhm,
but really it's not he's not talking about, like, as far as I can tell in the text is, like,
mhm,
it's not primarily about hell. It's about, like, the judgment of Israel and about,
mhm,
the time 70 AD when the temple is, right, destroyed. Like, that's really what Jesus is talking about. But also, I wanted to say that Alvin Plantinga had some really good advice where he's like, you know, "It's okay not to know everything. It's
yeah.
okay. Like, you're
That's it too.
totally okay."
There's a fear
Right?
of
Like,
being in
it's
a place
okay. Yeah.
of not having something settle in my mind. Is
Yeah.
it like a control thing, a pride thing that we want?
It's yeah,
I found that in my
yeah,
own life. If I can't control other things
sure.
around me, or if I would love to just have this settled so I don't have to
Yes.
think about it anymore, or I don't have to
Right.
be troubled with
Or,
the tensions.
you can
Yeah.
yeah, like, or, like, for me, like, if I think about my own journey in this stuff and in, like, how I've sort of processed it's like, I've thought about guys like Kierkegaard and all these sort of thinkers as, like, I'm really dialoguing. Like, there's a real sense in which, like, I need to have a conversation with people who have gone before me, and
Mhm.
I can't do this on my own. I can't do this just, like, as a independent, like, and my personality just I'm so, obsessive about, uh, truth once, like, the thing for me is, like, once you start going deeper in, like, maybe who these people are even citing, like, the sources that these thinkers are citing, you go further in that rabbit hole, then you get to start to
Yeah.
get some real meatier stuff, right? Like, you start to train yourself to read better, you can read harder things, and,
Yeah.
and I never stopped going, which is, like, one of the only times in my life where I've never given up on something, and,
Mhm.
I'm really grateful for that grace that God has, given me in that. And,
Mm.
my desire was, like, I didn't wanna stop believing because it was too good to not believe. That was, like, my
Yeah.
main, I think,
Yeah.
emotional
It's too
disposition.
enchanting.
So
Yeah.
yeah, it was, like, a way in which, like, I
Yeah.
had
The
never found
Trinity is
meaning
such a
like this
beautiful
other
Trinity.
outside of it,
Yeah.
right? Yeah, like, and then yeah, like, I had not outside of Christianity, nothing could ever make any sense or
Mhm.
ever be as even yeah, even the word therapeutic, like, no religion is even close to as therapeutic as
Mhm.
Christianity, right? Like, the God who created all things, you severed yourself from him to sin and death. He comes into that sin and death, into that sphere, into the domain, and rescues you. And you just
Mhm.
have to, like, hold just barely hold on. But, like, do you know what I mean? Like, there's nothing more beautiful
Yeah.
than that. There's not a more beautiful
Mhm.
story. So I d if there like, that means it has to, like, to me, it is just true because it is the most
Mhm.
beautiful. And there's also
Yeah.
truth there, but
Yeah.
you know what I
I
mean?
sense
Like,
sometimes. Yeah, exactly, and I sense sometimes people have this kind of feeling like it has to make sense in my puny little head
yeah.
before I can embrace something, and I have a hard time with that. I try not to be cynical because I understand people are coming from different
Yeah,
places, and it's not
for
just
sure.
that, but there is a sense of where, like, I think Kierkegaard says something like this is a rough paraphrase, but he says
Mhm.
something like, "The God I believe in is a heresy, but the
Mm,
God who answers my prayers is the true and living God." In other
yeah,
words, like, what you everything you believe about God is still not put together. I mean, even deep
yeah,
theologians who've been doing this for years, I mean,
mhm,
there's still nuances and depths and
mhm,
and differences, and even things you'll change your opinion on over the years, that it I'm
yeah,
just for me, um I'm interested to see where this is coming from sociologically.
Mhm.
I feel like it is happening amongst certain kinds of evangelicals who grew up in a certain evangelical culture
Mhm.
with and they might be in a kind of a mainstream, mega church or something. I'm not saying that
Yeah.
it's always that way, but it just seems like
Seems the
that's
majority
that's
of people are coming from
that's where
those
it's coming.
backgrounds.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I almost wonder, and this is my feeling, my hunch is that a lot of these mega churches are going through a down cycle. Like they're not going to last. I
Yeah.
don't think they have enough
No.
traditional grounding to last through anything other than neo-capitalism.
Right.
Contemporary
Right.
neo.
Kinda
Uh,
consumerism. Yeah, they thrive
yeah,
in the sort of consumerist framework,
it's
but
consumeristic.
outs
Yeah,
outside of that, when, like, the good is not what you can acquire, but,
ecosystem.
like yeah,
Yeah.
right, like, they couldn't last very long.
Yeah. So I mean,
So,
I do think we might see more and more this tendency to either kind of um, for evangelicals deconstruct or try to grab onto something ancient, or something
yeah,
that, like I said, like Alistair McIntyre said, something that's lasting and keeps going that we keep having a dialogue with because
yeah,
it's making the most sense for human experience and um that's why we're still doing it, why virtue ethics won't go away. It's such a rich
right,
tradition that
yeah,
um
right, no,
that
I think that's right, I think the, um for me, especially, was when I sort of stumbled into the tradition. Like,
Mhm,
that's when things really started to come. That's when I really started to fill out a lot of things, and where a lot
mhm,
of things started to. I want to use the word settle because I'm fairly settled in a lot of ways now, like that I never was before. But it
yeah,
was only by encountering the church fathers, the creeds, the councils of Nicaea, Chalcedon. These things really began to shape me, and recognizing that the spirit, and I would also say too, the deconstruction movement might have a little bit of um the sort of Pentecostal frame about the way the spirit works and how it's like
mhm,
dynamic, and it, like, you can't predict it, it's interruptive, and which is all true, but also like
mhm,
the spirit worked in the tradition as well. Like, there
right,
is, it can be a both and kind of
mhm,
thing here. It doesn't have to be, the Christianity's gotten it
mhm.
wrong for X amount of years, and then the true Christians started to
Yeah,
appear
boom,
in the 19th
yeah,
century or something. It makes zero sense to me
mhm,
why, even I saw on Instagram, either it was today, I think, about somebody framing the word ecclesia, because in
mhm,
the Greek, church is ecclesia, and it, like, sort of was like blaming Constantine in a way for how the church is, and I'm like, like, I get that's a really, to me, that's too easy to say it's like
mhm.
Constantine's fault or something like that. Somehow the Roman imperial cart, like, cult
So
poisoned
when Paul
Christianity.
uses it, I don't understand.
Do
Yeah.
you know what I mean? Like, Paul, the thing is, like, if we look to the
Use the Roman
earliest churches,
citizens and yeah.
yeah, well, it's almost like that idea of, and even the post ended with, like, it's not, it's like, it's important to meet as the church, but it's also important to be the church. And I was like,
Mhm,
yeah, it's entirely true. Like, I don't disagree with this, but, like, why do we wanna put up these sort of postures of I mean, again, this is sort of like, I think, more of an evangelical thing, where I'm like very high church sacramental, so I don't have any issues with the
mhm.
church as a building. Like, that's what it is
Yeah,
at some level. Like, what you see
yeah.
in the church are Christians. Like, at some level, like, we have to
Mhm.
take seriously our experience as human beings, and um, but
Yes.
the trust in that the spirit was always at work in the tradition, and, like, safeguarding the faith, where you are not the one who's in charge of safeguarding it, right? Like, it's not you
Yes.
really. Like, you're adhering to it, but,
Mhm.
like, the spirit is the one that is, like, carrying it inside of you. Like, it is truly a gift. You didn't
Yeah.
earn anything, and it was given to you as a gift. And sometimes I
Mhm,
think the deconstruction, the faith thing, gets very individualist about how they think about it's my faith. I have to do what's good for me. And it's like, no, your
mhm.
faith is a gift. Whatever you have inside you is the spirit that has delivered that to you. and it's the
Mhm.
spirit who's gonna care for you, but you also have to recognize that it's not your own. Like, you're not carrying
Mhm.
your own faith, and even if you wanna make it
Yeah.
about yourself, then it's gonna turn into some nebulous new age God Unitarian, God is everywhere, we're all
If
part of the
you have
God particle or
Yeah.
something.
If you have to
So,
create your own simulation of what this is, I mean, you're left to your own lights, and just
to me, it sounds
I
like
think
blue
yeah,
pilling, not
yeah,
red pilling, blue pilling.
yeah,
This, Matrix is coming out next week, but whatever, you know?
yeah. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Well, so yeah, and I think this is the thing too, to think about it like the canon.
Mm,
Um,
yeah.
how is it that we have the canon, the books we have as
Mhm.
Christians? Well, you might doubt, let's say, that James should be in the canon or whatever. You might rip that out of your Bible or whatever, but that's just you.
Yeah.
Like no one else
That's
uses
you.
it that way. Or
Yeah,
you
dude.
might be going to Dallas Theological Seminary and you think that the woman caught in adultery is an extra piece, an extra story
Add it
that was
on.
tacked on later.
Right.
No one else cares though. We're using it for authority and how to teach salvation. So like
Mhm.
everyone, all the East, West, the tradition, um, Christians, this is what has become for the church God's word,
Mhm.
and and it's useful
Yeah.
useful for all the things Paul teaches. So the canon. So you might take it away out of your memory or out of your experience, but it doesn't make that go away or be authoritative or be the light. So I think
Yeah.
that
Right.
same thing here when we're kind of thinking about these whether they're doctrines of God or
Mhm.
teachings of Christianity, and you
Yeah.
want to kind of build back better or make your own sort of piecemeal simulation. I think like that's going to be you, so that'll be your story.
Yeah.
It will be with you, and I understand that, but
Yeah.
that's not going to change the way things are and the way they're experienced in the life of the church. So I think
Well,
that
yeah, totally.
yeah.
I was gonna say, I think that,
And I'm not trying to be down on people. I've been there. So, I mean, I
no, no,
know
no.
what it feels like to
Yeah.
be like, "Ah," like I don't know if I believe this
Well,
anymore, it
yeah,
totally makes
I
sense.
think you still have personal, like, it still matters that you believe it as a person. Like, I think
Yeah,
your individual expression is very important. But what I
absolutely. It was
think
Kierkegaard.
is you wanna
That's what we've been
yeah,
bringing up.
dude,
Yeah.
I have Kierkegaard literally
Yeah.
tattooed on my arm here. Like, he's like,
Mhm,
"Truth is subjective." I'm like, "Yes,
yeah.
Kierkegaard, I agree with that." And, we can that's another podcast to flesh out,
Mhm,
um, the my point would be more because so in my journey, what really started to help me sort of reframe things and like not take so much of the burden on my own shoulders about what it means to even sustain faith. Because if
mhm,
you put it on yourself to like sustain it, even if you
mhm.
think you're like thinking that the spirit is a one, but you could be like confusing it for your own ability and
Right.
your own strength and will, right? Um,
Yeah.
I think what you said right there about like making it your story. It's like I think
Mhm.
the gospel is about you getting engrafted into the God story. Like
God's story.
you are getting put into that narrative, not that narrative needs to fit in your narrative, right? Like that
Mhm.
framing about we need to go and see find ourselves within that story, which is
Mhm.
already happening, always has been happening, but like we can participate in that redemptive story through the spirit. But like
Mhm.
if we're only thinking about how these things fit into our, like you said, like simulation's a good word, right? Like how
Mm.
all these things can fit into my own vantage. It's like you're just
Mm.
it's like this weird narcissistic, I don't
Yeah.
know, like very
And no, and
dangerous.
God's not gonna be held hostage by it. And so,
No.
I mean, if somebody's listening to struggle it too, I can hear them say, "Well, thinking of this being a critique," but I think that, it is true that, like, no God is in the church, we're not held hostage by the doubts. In fact, it's because
No.
God is truth that we're allowed to explore, the
Mhm.
Father what was it? Father, Chris Foley in that interview with
Mm.
Assad mentions doubting Thomas and how the tradition
Mhm.
celebrates has a doubting Thomas day and how
Yeah.
we're
That's right.
invited to, to bring our doubts to the Lord and, "Okay, like, this
Yeah.
is what I'm struggling with." So, like, being like you said, being part of God's bigger story, we can actually be authentic and be like, "This is what
Mhm.
is being taught. I'm not sure how it's gonna work." You
Yeah.
the kingdom is supposed to bring new life and light or whatever, into
Mhm.
and it's not happening in my life right now or something. Like, I doubt, I wonder if it's ever gonna happen, if I'll ever
Yeah.
be free from this sin or
Yeah.
whatever. So I do think there's a pastoral dimension to it, but yeah, I think that,
Deeply. The deeply
mhm.
pastoral element to it for sure.
So yeah, do reach out, and I mean, again, and the deconstruction process is something that can, um, it doesn't have to be a tearing down of a
Mhm.
faith. It could be a
Yeah.
dialogue where a student asks the rabbi master a question and asks
Yeah.
and lets them respond, lets the teacher respond. I
Yeah. You
think
have to, like,
there's a
recognize
dialogue.
who
Yeah.
who the master is, right? Like, you can't
Mhm.
not every
Right.
thinker's a master, right? Like, not
Yeah.
every single not every philosopher I read is gonna be, like, the one who I'm gonna allow to shape me totally, right? Like,
Mhm.
Paul is a
Yeah.
master, right? Like, Jesus is the master.
Mhm.
Like, you have to have
Right.
these tiers of, like, who you're
Mhm.
latching onto and how much weight you're gonna give to their what they say,
Mhm.
right? Like, what's the weightiest stuff in your life that you read?
Mhm.
That's really what you have to start to when you're in the
Mhm.
thralls of deconstruction, like, what's the
Mhm.
weightiest thing that you're reading, and why is it the weightiest thing that you're reading?
Yeah.
Like, there's a lot of levels here that when you're engaging this stuff, there's a lot of emotional
Mm.
pull, especially if you're struggling and don't wanna believe anymore because you're exhausted. I get that.
Right.
Like, I really do, because
Mhm.
being a Christian is not like a
Mhm.
all these notions of, like, when am I gonna prosper and this and that, it's like, it's just tied to consumeristic
Yeah.
frameworks about what
Mhm.
faith is, and, the
Yeah.
church is built on the blood of the martyrs, it's built on suffering, it's
Mhm.
not built on I
Mhm.
mean, like, yeah, Constantine helped to, like, alleviate a lot of this, like, horror, which is great, but there's still suffering that's involved with, like, the sins of the
Mhm.
church, and there's also so,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
I think, I wanna say one more thing because I think David Bentley Hart has
Mhm.
a good and I will always bring him up on every podcast because I think he's just like he's on
That's your
he
goal.
there's it's a
Yeah.
goal. He says so
Yeah.
many things that are right, and one thing that I read in an essay, I think in his, he has all these collections of essays that he puts out in, like, book form. There's one on metaphysics that's, like, really epic, and it talks about how
Oh. Awesome.
yeah, you should read that. It's like it came out a few years ago. It's really, really good.
Mhm.
I recommend it to everybody. I think his sort of metaphysical speculations are like some of the best around. But he has a whole point about the way that modern Christianity basically worships like this modern God that's almost like a demigod that's like part of the creation, and the way they think about
Mhm.
like providence is like really weirdly determinist, and but what he says is like there's a way in which
Mhm.
the sort of postmodern, or like the sort of Nietzsche sort of that the way that some people stop believing in this kind of God actually makes room for the true
Mhm.
God to appear, for the true God to make
Yeah.
his entrance
Almost.
into their lives. So I think the best thing that deconstruction can do is like take apart these idols and these sort of demigods that are not the true God, and start to
Mhm.
make space for the triune God to fill
Mhm.
those. That was like one of the best things I've read
That's
on
good.
this kind of thing. Yeah, it's very, very good. It's very helpful, I think, for those
Mhm.
of anybody's listening who's like dealing with that. Like, make
Mhm.
room, because the true God will make his appearance if
Mhm.
you make room for him, you know?
Mhm. Yeah. And what is it? Again, it's, the God I believe in is a heresy.
Mm.
The God I
Yeah,
pray to, and who answers my prayers, the true and living
is
God.
the true God.
So
Well, even
yeah.
in Mark,
So
right? Like, Lord, I
yeah.
I I believe, help my unbelief, right? Like, that is your posture, is that, and
Right.
it's scripture, right? Scripture is that, that's
Yeah.
a posture in scripture. So, um,
Mhm.
take that, yeah, with you when you're
Yeah.
going into do deconstructing,
Yes.
or
Well,
just
thank
don't.
you, Yeah, deconstructing the way you just mentioned, I think is the way we
Yeah,
all have to go. I mean, it's
I agree. Yeah,
basically
no,
to
totally.
challenge
Yeah.
challenge the things that we believe that have just gotten goofed up, or we need a better imagination, or we need
Mm,
a new way to, uh, to we need a new path to go and how we're relating to God, because the way we're imagining God is false. Maybe the way we were raised to imagine him
yeah.
is false. And so it's a that's what interests me about that journey, is just as you said, that sometimes we have to become an atheist of the God that we have
Mhm.
been raised with, if we've had bad impressions and if we're processing spiritual abuse.
Yeah,
So I
yeah.
think that,
Totally.
yeah.
Yeah, that stuff
Well,
factors in.
thanks, Anthony, and thanks, listeners. If you want to put a comment in, we love your comments, and if you want to share or retweet this episode, that would be great and get us on the map. If you like the show, keep listening. Hit that subscribe button. What I miss, Anthony? What do
Um,
people do? They
you hit
subscribe, they
all the
retweet.
yeah, it's well,
Yeah.
yeah, they tweet. I mean, we're there, but, it's not always as active as we could be. I did wanna say, there's this guy who emailed us a while ago, which I had kind of got lost in the mud. This guy Tyler,
Oh,
he emailed us, and so if
yeah.
he's listening, Tyler, we're gonna email you back, but, thank you for listening. He sent an email just to talk about how he feels like his journey is just so similar, and it's like
That's amazing.
he doesn't listen. So it's just really thankful for anybody to listen, to reach out. Like, yeah, if you want to reach out and talk, like we'd love
Yeah.
to just do more of that kind of stuff if people are needing to talk about things, or um yeah. So that would be my only addition to what you said. Just thanks for anybody who
Yeah.
reaches out. It's really cool.
Yeah. Thank you. All right. Have a good one. Stay safe out there. Enjoy your life.